does it reveal new witnesses? And because of the new timeline report, is there a timeline shift in what happened the afternoon and evening? Nolan Wells seemingly disappears. His body found washed up at Horn Island.
4:31. That is the time. That is the minute Nolan Wells' friends say the Triton pulled away from Horn Island and left him standing there. 4:31. Written down, reported. And according to what's been said publicly, it should be verifiable by GPS. Now hold that number, because 19 minutes later, 19, somebody standing on that same beach lifted a phone and took a photograph. And there is a young man in it, slender, black, blue swim trunks, half hidden behind a woman who has no idea she is about to become part of one of the most argued over images in this entire case. 4:50. That's the timestamp the person who submitted it gave. 19 minutes after the boat that brought Nolan Wells to that island was already gone. Think about what that means. If that is him, if that is Nolan Wells in those blue trunks, then everything we've been told about when he was last seen alive is off. Not by hours, by minutes. But in a case like this one, minutes are everything. Nancy Grace put that photograph on air, full screen, blown up, and then she said something about it that nobody watching expected. One observation, one question, and it flipped the entire meaning of that image. I'm going to show you exactly what she said, but not yet. Because before you can understand why her reaction landed the way it did, you need to see what else came out of that report, where the picture came from, who sent it, and what was sitting on page 12 that made Nancy stop the broadcast and tell her entire panel to look at their screens. There's a boat in that report that nobody has named. They just call it Boat X. There's a fight at 5 in the evening that nobody has explained. And there's a contradiction about a girl named Katie that made Nancy say, out loud, on air, red flag. Stay with me. Because the answer to the 450 photograph is not the answer you're bracing for.
I want you to hear what one of them said, though, about the mysterious Katie.
I didn't wake up again until a little after 11 o'clock. And that was to my brother coming in the room being like, hey, Warren's trying to get a hold of you. Warren gets on the phone and he's just like, hey, man, he was like, hey, have you talked to Nolan? Anything else? I was like, no, I haven't talked to him, man. He was with that girl last time I knew. And he was like, okay. He was like, man, we can't get a hold of him. We don't know where he's at. And I was like, man, it's Nolan. He's probably just out somewhere with that girl. Like, get a hold of the girl, you'll probably find Nolan.
Okay, right there, I'm getting a red flag. That's from the Officer Tatum podcast, who joined us recently. That girl, the mysterious Katie. Remember, nobody who knew who she was. But then later, Dave Mack, do we learn that one of the guys on the boat had been texting with her and knew full well who it was? Where did the name Katie come from?
Katie was known to at least one person in the group, and that leads you to believe there were certainly more. There were a number of comments publicly made by friends of Nolan that backtracking, claiming they didn't know who Katie was, had never seen her before, and then you find out, yeah, well, not only did they know her, but they were texting around about her. So there's a lot of missing information here, Nancy, and it's why you've said all along, why are these guys not on a polygraph?
Start with the source. Because the source is the reason this photograph exists at all. The United Cajun Navy did something simple. They asked. They went to their followers and they said, if you were out there that day, if you have pictures, if you have video, anything, send it to us. Let us look at it. Let us see if any of it matters. And people sent it. Brian Trasher is the vice president of the United Cajun Navy, and he sat down with Nancy, and he was careful about one thing above all else. He thanked her for calling their document what it is, a timeline, not an investigative report. He was firm about that. Some people have been calling it an investigation, and he says that isn't accurate, because they are not investigators. That is not what they do. And that is not what this is. What they did was collect, compile, organize. They took everything the public sent them and they put it into one document that an ordinary person could actually read and follow. Their words, a digestible format. And Trasher was blunt about the possibility that none of it matters. Maybe law enforcement has seen all of this already. Maybe it's nothing new to them. But they wanted to be transparent about what they received. And here's the part that matters for what you're about to see. The United Cajun Navy did not take a single one of those photographs. Not one. Every image in that report came from a member of the public. People who were out on the water that day. People who thought they might be holding something that could help Nolan's family. So how do you turn a pile of strangers' vacation photos into a timeline? You cross-reference. They took the images and they laid them against Google Earth and satellite imagery of the island, trying to pin down exactly where each shot was taken. They pulled the original coordinates that were called out when the missing person report first went out. They ran the pictures against each other. This boat is here. Now it isn't. What changed and when? They used software to build the index. They included social media posts, some of which may or may not prove anything, but they were posted in real time, and real time is context, and then they published it. Page 12 of that report is where Nancy Grace stopped everything. We're coming back to page R12. I promise you that. But page 14 is where the photograph is. Look at what's actually in the frame. 3 young women in the foreground, in bikinis. A white male walking along, ordinary, 4th of July ordinary. Then look to the right of the frame. Beside the woman on that side, there are 2 more figures. One of them appears to be female, standing further back. And between them, partially blocked, partially cut off by the woman in front of him, is an African-American male in blue swim trunks. That's it. That's the whole thing. A slice of a person at the edge of somebody else's holiday snapshot. The person who submitted that image told the United Cajun Navy it was taken at approximately 4:50 in the evening Central Time on the 4th of July. Now put that against the other number. The friends on the Triton say they left at 4:31, 19 minutes. That is the entire gap. And inside that gap sits a young man in blue trunks standing on a beach he was supposedly no longer connected to by any boat. Trasher did not oversell it. He went the other direction. He got out ahead of the problem himself. Because here's the trouble with the timestamp. A timestamp can lie to you without anybody lying. If somebody screenshots a photo, the timestamp can reflect the moment of the screenshot, not the moment the shutter clicked. So a number on a file is not proof of when a person stood on a beach. The United Cajun Navy said so in the report itself. They could not verify those times definitively. They wrote that down. They flagged it. But they could do something else. Shadows. You can read the length of a shadow. You can read where the sun is sitting. And from that, you can say with confidence that certain images in that report were taken in the late afternoon. Not morning, not midday, late. So here's where that leaves it. The timestamp says 4:50. The shadows say late afternoon. The two agree with each other, which leaves exactly one question standing. Is the man in the blue swim trunks Nolan Wells? Nancy Grace looked at that photograph, blown up, on her own screen, and she answered that question in a way that stopped the conversation cold. We're getting there. First, page 12. This is the image Nancy told her entire panel to stop and look at. A cluster of boats, anchored side by side in a cove, some of them tied together. In the report, they're labeled Boat 1, Boat 2, Boat 3, and then one more. Boat X, just X, unnamed, unidentified. Plus the boat the photograph was taken from, because somebody was standing on a 5th vessel to shoot it. Boat number 3 is identified as the Palm Beach. The Triton is in there, the boat Nolan came out on. Another vessel that surfaced in this case carries the name Mac Daddy, and every single one of those boats is full of people. Boat 1, full. Boat 2, full. Boat 3, full. Boat X, full. People on the boat the photo was taken from, and more people down in the water between them. Yes, there are containers in the water. Open containers. Nancy addressed that head-on and dismissed it just as fast. As far as she knows, that isn't a felony. Everybody out there was drinking. That is not the story. This is the story. Other people look at that photograph and they see young people having a good time on the 4th of July. Nancy Grace looks at it and sees witnesses. That was her exact framing, and she hammered it. Do you see all those people? Who are they? Have they been spoken to? Have they been polygraphed? What can they tell me? 4 questions, fired in a row. And Caitlin Becker of the New York Post had to give her the uncomfortable answer. Nobody knows. From an investigative standpoint, there is no way for the public to know who in that specific photograph has been interviewed, or what any of them said, because there has been no real transparency on that front. What reporting does indicate is that dozens of people have spoken to law enforcement as witnesses in this case. But whether any of those dozens are the people in that cove, the people in that exact frame, nobody outside the sheriff's office can say. Dozens of potential eyes, and no confirmation that a single one of them belongs to the crowd in the picture.
The photo we keep showing you is on page 12 of the United Cajun Navy report. It shows 3 boats and more anchored side by side, boat number 3, the Palm Beach, and also the Triton, we believe, which is the boat that took Nolan to Horn Island. It's also the boat that reportedly leaves, according to the occupants, without Nolan. They claim they begged him to board their vessel, but he said no.
And this is where it stops being abstract. Nancy raised something practical. A boat is not anonymous. A boat is registered. It carries a number the way an aircraft carries a tail number. Many of them carry a name as well. Triton, Palm Beach, Mac Daddy. Number leads to owner. Owner leads to a list of who was aboard that day. Trasher confirmed the logic. Theoretically, yes. If you can make out the registration number or the vessel name where a name is registered alongside it. He noted the name isn't always on a state registration. Sometimes it lives on a Coast Guard document instead. But it is findable. And something else is already happening. Trasher says he's been told a lot of people have been contacted and interviewed, and that a number of people who were out there that day came forward on their own, voluntarily. Some of them because they recognized their own boat in a photograph going around online, and picked up the phone to say, "That's us. Here's where we were. Here's who was with us. Here's what we know." He commended them for it. He pointed out it isn't always an easy thing to do. So the pool is real. The pool is identifiable. And at least some of that pool has already walked into the room on its own 2 feet. Trasher flagged something in the new submissions that had not been part of the public picture before, and it may be the most quietly important detail in the entire report. The photographs everybody had already seen showed people standing in waist-deep water. Some of the new ones don't. Some of the new ones show water at chest height. On one young woman holding something in her hand, the water looks close to her neck. That is not wading. That is treading. Nancy pushed back on one of them. The image at the top, where people are holding drinks and the water is up around their armpits. Those people, she said, are standing. They are not treading anything. Trasher gave her that one. Then he pointed her to another. 3 boats visible, a 4th further out, a group of young people. Some on the boat, some in the water. And depending on the height of the individual, some of them out where the water is riding up near the neck. Here's why it matters. Horn Island has an aggressive slope. That has been said repeatedly, and it cannot be said enough. You can be in shallow water and deep water within a few steps. A few. And the moment your feet come off that bottom, you are no longer in charge of where you are. A current takes you. A riptide takes you. People were socializing out there, in that water, holding drinks, in an area where the floor drops out from under you without warning. Joe Scott Morgan addressed the question everybody keeps asking. If he drowned in that cove, surrounded by all those people, why didn't anyone see him? His answer is that the assumption underneath the question is wrong. Bodies do not reliably float. He has seen bodies go directly to the bottom. Others float. Water temperature is a factor. And then there's obstruction. A body can be caught beneath a vessel. Morgan says he has worked cases exactly like that. People searching an area, unable to find someone because the whole surface was covered in boats. Now go back to page 12. Look at the cluster again. Boat 1, Boat 2, Boat 3, Boat X, the boat the photo was taken from, and more in the distance. That is not a hypothetical in this cove. That is a description of it. One more thread from that afternoon, because the timing sits right on top of everything else. Sometime after 3 and before 4:30, a sea tow call goes out. The Triton is taking on water. Then the call is canceled. The report indicates Nolan's grandfather made the cancellation call, possibly because he had the better signal, after somebody arranged another option. That other option was Bart Edmondson, who ended up towing the boat himself. A good Samaritan, neighbor helping neighbor, and for that, Trasher says, the man is now being dragged over the coals online. Remember that. It becomes a pattern in this case. Dave Mack raised the point that quietly reframes this entire narrative, and it has not gotten the attention it deserves. We keep saying his friends, as if that means one group on one boat making one decision. It doesn't. Nolan came out to Horn Island on the Triton with 3 or 4 people, but the friend group that day was scattered across 3 or 4 different boats. Warren Hudson has spoken publicly about Nolan. He's been on Officer Tatum's podcast talking about his best friend and everything that happened. Warren Hudson did not go to Horn Island on the same boat as Nolan Wells. And then comes the detail that turns the whole thing sideways. We have all been operating on an assumption. You leave with who you brought you. Run with the one that got you there. It's the natural expectation, and it's the reason the phrase "they left without him" carries the weight it does. But reporting now indicates Nolan was never going back on the Triton. That was never the plan. So the question stops being, why did that one boat leave him behind? The question becomes something much harder to answer. Which boat was Nolan Wells supposed to ride home on? And did anybody on it wait? Nobody has answered that. Not publicly. Not yet. Here is the collision. At the very beginning, the account was clean. Nobody knew the girl Nolan stayed behind to talk to. Never seen her before. Never met her. Just some girl he struck up a conversation with on the beach. She has since been identified. Katie. And Katie's sister has posted her own version of that afternoon. According to that post, Katie had a conversation with Nolan. Nothing dramatic. She assumed he was about to get on the boat he came out on because his friends were calling him over. And she assumed reasonably that they would not leave without him. Katie made it home on a different boat, so sit with the 2 statements side by side. He tells her he's going back with his friends. They say he stayed with her. Nancy's response to that was 3 words. That's a problem. Caitlin Becker offered the complication that might explain it, and it might. There were multiple boats of friends out there. The Triton had 3 or 4 people on it. But if Nolan said he was going back to his friends, he may have meant a completely different vessel, not the Triton at all. That ambiguity is exactly where the confusion lives, and it deserves to be said out loud. But it does not explain the next part, because the reporting now indicates that at least one person in that group had been texting with Katie, which raises the obvious question. Where did the name Katie come from in the first place? If she was a stranger? If nobody had ever seen her before? If she was just some girl? How was anyone texting around about her, and how did anyone know what to call her? Nancy's reaction, on air, in the moment, was 5 words. Right there, I'm getting a red flag. And then there's the clip. One of the young men from the boat describing his own night, he says he didn't wake up again until a little after 11, when his brother came in the room to tell him Warren was trying to reach him. Warren gets on the phone and asks if he's talked to Nolan. He says no. He hasn't talked to him. Nolan was with that girl last he knew. Warren tells him nobody can get hold of Nolan. Nobody knows where he is. And his answer is, it's Nolan. He's probably out somewhere with that girl. Get hold of the girl, you'll probably find Nolan. That girl. Not everybody on that panel thought any of this mattered. John Mobley, a veteran trial lawyer out of South Carolina, said he reviewed the report in detail, and his verdict was flat. It doesn't put any points on the board. It doesn't move the needle. His argument, to be fair to him, is a real one. The timestamps can't be trusted, and the report says so itself. The images might be enhanced or color manipulated, and the report says that too. A great deal of the material is secondhand. This person said, that person said. He called it a rabbit hole of information that may not be reliable. He did give the report credit for one thing. Unlike a documentary where people form opinions off second and third-hand information with no attribution, this document sources everything. It tells you who said it and whether they witnessed it themselves or repeated it from someone else. Nancy did not take it well. She told him he was wasting her time, that she has 1 hour, and he had just spent a minute of it. Then she told him about an earring, a serial killer she convicted, one case, and a large part of what she proved came down to a single earring. The victim was wearing one. The other had been sliced out of her ear and turned up somewhere else entirely. And where it turned up taught her everything, because every investigation starts somewhere. You don't have the timestamp? Fine. Now you know the photograph exists, so go get the timestamp. Find out whether it was enhanced. Find out whether that's Nolan at 4:50. Find the people who took the pictures, identify the boats, then take the people off those boats and interview them one by one by one. Evidence, she said, is not handed to you on a silver platter on top of a Christmas tree. You go find it. Her closing line to him, rabbit hole my rear end, and then she said she was sending him to the corner to think about what he'd said. Caitlin Becker backed her from the journalism side and made the sharper version of the point. The rabbit hole is the internet. The rabbit hole is reading every single stranger's theory. A sourced document with coordinates and times, one that flags its own unverified material, is the opposite of that. It's somewhere to point your effort. Though Becker raised one genuine problem with all those witnesses, everybody in those photographs is dressed the same, bathing suits, and the boats look similar to each other too. Somebody saying they saw a certain person on a certain boat may not be as reliable as it sounds. Nancy's answer to that was pure prosecutor. Nobody is getting on her witness stand saying they all looked the same. You get the boat names. You find the owner. You ask the owner who was aboard. You do not build a case on somebody's eyesight from 30 yards away after a day of drinking. So, back to page 14. Back to the man in the blue trunks. Back to 4:50. Nancy Grace had it blown up on screen, and she said it isn't him. That's the reversal. She went through it out loud, piece by piece. She asked whether the man in the photo has facial hair. She questioned the trunks themselves. Aren't those supposed to be deep dark blue? Because what she was looking at didn't read that way to her. She raised the possibility the image had been filtered or enhanced or the color manipulated. She said she'd have to bring in NASA to enhance it. And then she landed on the line. I don't think this is Nolan, but that's just my own two eyes. Now here's the part that makes this worth understanding rather than just reacting to. Brian Trasher did not fight her. He agreed the identification could not be made. He said outright that they could never verify it. Probably not him. That was his read too. So why publish it? Because that is what the report is for. His reasoning was that they could tell it was an African-American male on the beach in blue swim trunks. And that alone was enough to say it's possible. And if there's a possibility sitting in a photograph, you don't hide it. You put it in front of people so it can be examined and eliminated. Rule it out. That was the exchange. Nancy said we need it for the investigation. Trasher said, that's exactly why it's in there. Use it to rule it out. And there is a second reason that image earned its page. It captures the flotilla. It shows the boats. If investigators are ever hunting for one particular vessel in that cove, that frame is a good one to hang on to. So the photograph everybody is going to argue about this week may well be a stranger, and it still moves the case forward, because eliminating a possibility is not nothing. Ruling something out is how you narrow what's left. Which brings us to what is not in anybody's report. The autopsy is complete. It is being kept from the public. The toxicology is not out. There is no witness list. Nancy's frustration on this was the through line of the entire hour. The government has gone radio silent, and a volunteer organization asking strangers for vacation photos is currently producing more public information than the agencies holding the actual file. Reports indicate a grand jury is convening to gather evidence, and there are still open questions with no answer attached to them. Who was fighting at 5 in the evening? Because by 7:30, a witness states Nolan was nowhere to be seen. Not in the water, not on the shore, nowhere. There is also audio circulating that keeps getting replayed, where people believe you can hear someone say Nolan's dead. Nancy was careful with it. She doesn't know whether it's real. But she made the point that you can find out whether it's real. Enhance it, test it. Somebody with the right equipment can answer that question, and nobody has. And one thing has to be said plainly, because Nancy said it plainly herself. The men who were on the Triton with Nolan Wells are not charged with anything. They are presumed innocent. She said it directly, on air, and told her audience to stop the death threats. Interview them separately, absolutely. Learn what they know, but do not attack them. The same goes for the man who towed the boat. The same goes for the volunteers who compiled the report and are now getting threats for their trouble. The truth in this case is out there somewhere in a cove full of witnesses who have not all been found yet. If you know something, if you were out there that day, if you have a photograph, if you have a video sitting on your phone that you never thought twice about, law enforcement has a number for this case. 228-769-3063. One picture found Gabby Petito. A couple out in dispersed camping in the middle of nowhere recognized a van. That's all it took. It might only take one here. If you want to keep following this case as the autopsy, the toxicology, and that grand jury develop, please subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update. And tell us in the comments, do you think the man in the blue swim trunks at 450 is Nolan Wells? Or do you side with Nancy on this one? A final note. Everything in this video is based on publicly reported information, on the timeline document released by the United Cajun Navy, and on statements made during the Crime Stories broadcast with Nancy Grace. The United Cajun Navy has stated clearly that their document is a compiled timeline and not an investigation, and that they could not verify the timestamps or the identity of the individual in the photograph discussed. No one has been charged with any crime in connection with the death of Nolan Wells. Every individual named or referenced here is presumed innocent. Nothing in this video should be taken as an accusation against any person.